Thank you. And welcome to this event, which our experts will be exploring the realities of retail crime and what works to reduce it. This is a real passion of mine, and it does require a whole system approach. And working with practitioners, we often encounter issues from across the sector, from policing to retailers to victims, through the prison system and back into the community. It's attracting much media attention, and it's driving the idea of a growing crime wave on the British High Street. The headlines suggest that theft goes unpunished, while the government is pursuing longer sentencing for shoplifting via the Crime and Policing Bill. What is actually driving these trends? How can the justice system respond in a way that is both fair and effective? For this event, we are very privileged to host 4 experts who each speak to their experience of research and crime. So first of all, may I gladly introduce Professor Emmeline Taylor. Thank you, Emmeline. I see you on screen now. And Emmeline is a professor of criminology at City University and the host of the most amazing Retail Crime Uncovered podcast. If you haven't heard one of those sessions, I really do urge you to do that. So over to you, Emmeline. Thank you very much for hosting.
Brilliant, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Just uploading my slides there. Hopefully you can now see those. Can you see them, Jason?
I can't just yet. It's dark at the moment. I'll give you a thumbs up when they do land.
Still not showing.
No, not yet.
Oh, okay.
Miranda, if you
I'm
going
to stop sharing and try again. Not sure what's happened there.
We have tested this, everybody. It does work. I assure you. Hang on in there. There you go. They're up. All yours.
Oh, fantastic. That worked. Brilliant. Okay, so in 10 short minutes, I'm going to talk briefly around what sits behind the headlines that we're seeing in relation to retail crime. But first off, just a brief introduction. I'm a professor of criminology. I specialise in retail crime, and I've just put on screen here a selection of recent projects and reports that I've published on various aspects of the retail crime topic. I wear a few different hats. I'm Professor of Criminology at City University of London, and I'm also Director of APTUS, which is a business crime research centre. All of these reports are freely available online, but if you can't find them, please drop me a note and I'll be very happy to share them with you. And also just a shameless plug to my podcast, Retail Crime Uncovered, now in its 3rd series. So we're looking at what is behind the headlines. Well, what are the headlines telling us? So just these 3 different ones that I've almost randomly selected. We see different reasons being given for this uplift in retail crime across the UK sector. Organised criminal network gangs targeting our high streets. We've got the cost of living crisis being implicated, and also middle class shoplifters, the finger being pointed at them by Archie Norman, the chairman of Marks and Spencer's. So 3 very different reasons being given, and I'll talk a little bit about what I think actually is driving some of this epidemic of shop theft, the tsunami of retail crime, all of these superlatives that we hear being used to describe just how serious things have got. Now, I talk about the 5 V's of retail crime that have begun to characterise what we're seeing on our high streets post-pandemic. So this is since around 2020. And these 5 V's represent the volume and the value and the violence that we're increasingly seeing associated with theft in our stores. So the British Retail Consortium, they have an annual survey. They suggest that the losses from customer theft now exceeds over £2 billion a year. And other industry figures will suggest similar amounts as well. And then on top of that, it's a huge amount that the industry is then investing in crime control mechanisms. So anything from human guarding to CCTV to controversial live facial recognition, tags, alarms, etc., this is all costing the industry a significant amount in an attempt to dissuade offenders from targeting their stores. Now, hand in hand with this increase in shop theft, we're also seeing elevated levels of violence and verbal abuse against shop workers. 2,000 incidents a day was the widely reported level that this had reached. Now, the recent BRC figures released earlier this week suggest violence might be slowing down, plateauing, or even in some locations actually reducing, but there's still a significant level, far too high, of assaults and verbal abuse that are being levelled towards hardworking shop staff. But I'd also like to flag that retail is one of the only private sector industries that has a higher proportion of female public-facing staff. And I think we need to begin to think carefully through this, particularly in terms of the violence against women and girls agenda, the government seeking to halve VAUG over the next 10 years. And the retail sector, I think, is a really key part of that picture in terms of the way that violence is experienced routinely by women, causing cumulative harm, but also setting social expectations and the normalisation of violence and verbal abuse towards women and girls. So those are the first three, and I think they're the three that we talk very commonly about in terms of retail crime. But I'll just move on to the fourth thing, which is around velocity. And what I mean by this is that we're seeing this huge increase in retail crime, and it's following clear economic principles of supply and demand. So we have a growing demand for stolen goods, and that's because of the networks in which these stolen products are being sold into. So it's really key to not only look at the theft, but also look at those illicit disposal routes. This increase in theft can be correlated to the increase in use of peer-to-peer e-commerce platforms. So things like Facebook Marketplace has become a hotbed for selling on stolen goods. And perhaps we need to have more attention on these platforms to be able to better identify individuals who are routinely selling stolen goods in bulk and repeatedly. Now, unfortunately, we also know that some other businesses are also the recipients of stolen goods, and many offenders that I speak to talk about being issued with shopping lists each day, so they'll go out and steal to order to fulfill the requirements of those rogue businesses, whether it's a convenience store, a restaurant, or whether it's an individual in the community that has set up almost a makeshift distribution network to sell on these goods. And it's important, I think, to think about this in terms of criminal exploitation, because often those thieves are drug affected and they're stealing in order to furnish their Class A drug addiction, and they're vulnerable and they're being exploited by these other individuals that want to profit from their desperation to fulfill their addiction. Now, the fifth V that I often talk about is volatility. And what I mean by this is that increasingly we're seeing the demand for specific goods shift in response to what's happening internationally. So just a couple of examples here in terms of the demand for artisan cheese. Last Christmas, we saw the Great Cheese Heist, it was dubbed, where over £300,000 of cheese was stolen, shipped out of the country to service black markets in countries where they had import bans. And there's similar cases around these other products, champagne, gift cards, and baby formula, that I don't have time to expand upon, but just to say that this is an increasing trend in terms of that volatility, and makes it very difficult domestically to be able to see what's on the horizon in terms of organised crime. So I'll move quickly on to police reported incidents of shop theft. Now, the data up to March 2025 was the highest figure of police recorded incidents of shop theft since the recording practice began over 20 years ago. Now, there has been a slight reduction in that. It's thought that maybe crime might be slightly plateauing, or is it that just the reporting has increased rather than the actual level of crime coming down? So some would say this is a good thing, that the action that's being taken. We've had 2 iterations of the police crime action plan. We've got Opal now targeting on organised crime, and we've got the legislative changes forthcoming this year in the crime and policing bill. However, that figure, that over 500,000 incidents, so the highest level that we've seen, is still a drop in the ocean compared to what the retailers are saying is actually happening. And I estimate that less than 3% of shop thefts are actually currently being reported to the police. And it's really important to look at the outcomes data from this. So we can imagine of those 3% that are reported, they're probably the most serious, violent, and they probably have the most solvability factors, meaning that there's clear evidence of who the perpetrator is. However, over half of those very minor reports are still being closed with no suspects identified, despite, as I mentioned previously, those huge investments in technology, body-worn cameras, facial recognition, CCTV, etc. So just highlighted, we've got a real issue with that outcomes data. But also to flag in this is that there is an underutilisation of diversionary and educational disposals, as well as out-of-court resolutions. Now, the offenders, I think it's important to break down into their different profiles based on motivation, based on their modus operandi and the techniques that they're using in order to steal from shops. So we have, as I mentioned, organised criminal networks that Opal now, thankfully, are responding to and having some really great successes in doing so. There's a new type of offender on the block that I've described as a criminal entrepreneur, for want of a better terminology, because I think it's rather sort of complimentary, it sounds, in some ways. And these are individuals that now target very specific categories of products so that they can resell them because they're familiar with the resale market. So Jellycat toys, Lego, for example. We then have the prolific local drug-affected offenders. Some suggest that as much as 70% of offences are committed by this particular profile. And there is some steps to guide these towards rehabilitation, such as the offender to recovery programmes in West Midlands and by Notts Police. But this needs scalability, and there also needs to be investment in rehabilitation more broadly, not just for those that are criminally motivated to furnish a drug habit. We've had a huge disinvestment in rehabilitation services through austerity. But this leads to opportunistic offenders and young offenders and those that are stealing sort of habitually that we don't really have a huge amount of attention on. And this is why I think really driving the out-of-court resolution or a conditional caution for shop theft is really paramount, particularly because with upcoming legislation that repeals the £200 threshold for low-level shop theft, there'll no longer be the ability to issue a fine. So this means those positive outcomes that are already only, less than 50%, then we won't have that same disposal route available. So potentially those outcomes are going to plummet even further. So we need to have this new intervention. So having worked with Restorative U and other partners, we're looking to build in what we're currently calling the Retail Crime Accountability Programme, which is designed to provide a credible, visible and immediate consequence for low-level retail crime. Think of it almost as like a speed awareness course, which is run virtually. We'll have victim testimonies in order to break down some of those common excuses and narratives that we know have built up around shop theft. It's underscored by 3 key policy pillars. So the out-of-court resolutions national strategy, the UK government's Safer Streets initiative, which also has the Tackling Retail Crime Together strategy as part of it, and then, of course, the AI Action Plan for Justice. So we're in the early stages of having developed this programme and looking to pilot it in several police forces to see the impact that it can have in terms of having that swift educational intervention that is restorative justice informed and ensures that victims have their voices represented to challenge some of those misconceptions that retail crime is somehow a victimless crime. So I'll leave it there. I'm aware that time is against us. You can get my contact details just by the QR code there, but I'll stop sharing now. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Emmeline. We'll be sure to share your contact details on. But thank you so much for that, and I'm really looking forward to some of the questions popping up as well. So if you do have questions for Emmeline in particular, that was an amazing flash talk. You covered an awful lot in that 10 minutes, so thank you very much. Please do put your questions in the chat. So thank you so much. So moving on now to wonderful Southwest and Devon and Cornwall Police. I'm really excited to introduce Chris Challoner, who is the business crime lead and crime prevention lead in Devon and Cornwall Police, and the amazing Sarah Carson Brown. We work with Sarah an awful lot, and we are absolutely privileged to do so. And Sarah is the lead for reducing reoffending in Devon and Cornwall Police. So start off with Chris, over to you, and followed by Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. I think Miranda's going to put
Your
our
slides
PowerPoint
on.
presentation and the slides. Yeah, just up on the screen. I'll just hang on.
Here
for
it
that.
comes. There you go. Should be
Lovely
up there
stuff.
now.
Lovely. Yeah, if we could go on to the next one, please. There's nothing further to introduce with Jason, really. I think you gave me a good introduction. I wouldn't necessarily class myself as an expert. I really enjoyed that that input from Emmeline, really, and yeah, like you said, really good. So looking forward to conversation about that in a bit. But basically, since October 2023, retail crime has been a real clear priority for us in Devon and Cornwall Police, and we've recognised that the problem was persistent, it's visible, it's impacting retailers, staff and communities. So rather than incremental change, we undertook a strategic reset. So this presentation kind of outlines a small part of that journey, and then why it now leads us towards reducing reoffending in a more structured way. I've got next slide, please. So as said, we completed a strategic assessment to help us understand the true problem in D&C, and the key takeaway from that really was that 87% of offences where we could identify an offender were committed by repeats. So this is not a volume problem alone, it's a repeat offender problem, and we also identified that a significant cohort of young people aged between around 12 to 16 were involved in retail crime, but the most common offending age was 31, followed by 30, then 35, but then notably age 14. And of the top 50 most prolific offenders, 7 were already in prison at that time, but 19 had no fixed addresses, so suggesting instability and financial hardship. So that data told us something really important. You know, this is not random, it's systemic. Next slide, please. So we can't arrest our way out of the problem. It's a really common term that you hear policing really talk about in relation to retail crime, but enforcement absolutely matters. Retail crime is not low level. Violence against shop staff is absolutely unacceptable. However, the data shows us that arrest alone is not breaking the cycle. So we're seeing arrest, go to court, be released, reoffend. And if 87% of offences are linked to repeat offenders, then purely increasing arrest is not going to solve that root issue. That said, we also recognise that we had a lot of work to do internally. Next slide, please. So we invested in dedicated leadership, including a business crime and crime prevention sergeant role, working at a tactical level, as well as a force-wide strategic lead. We launched Project Retail, which is aligned to the core pillars of neighbourhood policing. And we reviewed arrest rates, charge rates, outcome rates. And as a result of some of the work we've undertaken, we've already seen a 6.5% increase in positive outcomes and detection rates. That demonstrates improved investigation standards for that crime type, and a clear message that retail crime is becoming and is being taken really seriously in Devon and Cornwall with those improvements. Next slide. Despite those improvements, though, we continue to see the same individuals committing offences, and many of those present with substance misuse, mental health needs, housing instability, financial hardship, as I said before. And we also can't ignore the sheer amount of young people that are entering the system early. If we don't intervene differently, we risk creating the next generation of prolific retail offenders, essentially. Next slide, please. So our position is really clear. Retail crime is serious, assaults on shop workers are serious, organised retail theft is serious, but seriousness does not necessarily mean singularity of approach, and we've got to enforce robustly. We've got to protect victims, we've got to improve outcomes, but ultimately we've got to reduce reoffending rates, and the data demands that balance between them all. Next slide, please. And during our journey since October 2023, we've strengthened enforcement, we've improved detections, and we've created some strategic clarity. But that strategic assessment made one thing undeniable, really, and that's if 87% of offences are committed by repeat offenders, the biggest impact and opportunity lies in stopping them from reoffending in the first place. So for me, this is identifying who needs support alongside accountability. It means being proactive where we can rather than just reactive. And it means using innovative approaches to break the cycle where appropriate. And that is such as the use of the deferred prosecution scheme that we've got running and restorative justice. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah Carlson-Brown just to explain a bit more about what deferred prosecutions are and how we're beginning to utilise this approach to reduce reoffending rates in Devon and Cornwall for retail crime.
Thanks, Chris, very much. Next slide, please. Sound like Chris Whitty. That's a blast from the past, isn't it? So just a bit about deferred prosecution. Now, I will say that this isn't the panacea. This is about having alternative and different options that are suitable for some offenders. And within shoplifting, we found sometimes a sort of all or nothing kind of response. And what we want to move to is a place where this is used more often, where it is appropriate. Because when we have been able to use it, we've seen that really positive results. So just for those who don't know, deferred prosecution, we have both a child and adult scheme in Devon and Cornwall, but this is talking about the adult scheme. It's 16 weeks contracts that suspends the actual appearance at court. Obviously, they don't go to court if they're compliant with the conditions that are set within that 16-week contract. But the beauty of it is the celerity of action in terms of how the key workers engage that person really quickly, and we know that's really important, but also it actually being really person-centred. So it is about getting underneath and articulating and understanding and responding to the myriad of needs that can be present that are linked to somebody's offending. And often that offending isn't in just isolation to shoplifting. So that's the real power of it, is actually, people responding to people, but trained key workers who can advocate and broker for other statutory agency involvement, third sector, but also really hold that person to account for the harm that they've caused. So really working to address some of their blind spots that Emmeline referred to in, well, this doesn't matter, or, shops can take it. It's about actually getting them to really understand the impact of what they do. We are police staff, or rather the team are police staff, and they sort of bridge into communities. So really looking at community responses. It's slightly different than other DPS schemes. So we do want an admittance of guilt or acceptance of responsibility. Hopefully, with obviously CCTV, etc., that's something which is pretty easy to get. And successful completion does mean it comes out as an outcome 22. So that is a no further action. But if we've done our job right and we've done really good exit strategies, we see really good levels of reducing reoffending, which I'll come on to in a bit. If they don't, they proceed to court. Next slide, please. So this is just an example. There are strength-based assessments as well. There are the key workers deliver brief interventions that are bespoke to the offender and the offence. But this just gives you an example of the sort of changes that we see from the distance travelled from the beginning, which is the orange, so really critical needs, hanging around those low numbers, the ones and the twos, to actually the end of that 16 weeks. And this is the person's assessment, okay? So it's not the worker's assessment. They will obviously add their notes, but you can see that expansion where some of those needs which were critical have diminished across the piece. Next, please. And this was a study, we have done an RCT with Cambridge on our deferred caution, which showed I think it was a 86% reduction in harm. This is a recent level 4. It was a level 4 study on deferred charge, which is where shoplifters would sit. And it's a reduction of reoffending by half. So in terms of court costs, etc., it makes sense. Next slide. So this is an example where I wanted to show you is somebody who was actually eligible for deferred prosecution, but went through to court. And the question I always sort of pose to people is, what do we think has the best outcome in terms of the opportunities to reduce them reoffending again? So, you know, you just need to look at the profile of this in terms of the offender, a female in drink, couldn't remember the offence. There's a background of obviously DA. Actually underneath that, what we also were able to uncover is that there was historic sexual abuse when she was a child, etc. So there was a lot of kind of trauma, chaotic lifestyle that actually her court outcome was, you know, as you can read there, costs, victim surcharge, etc. But there was no kind of recompense in terms of maybe addressing some of those underlying needs and getting that person to really understand the impact of what they were doing to themselves and to others. And then I've outlined there what some of the initial conditions would be for this person if they'd come onto the DPS scheme, and some of the rehabilitative conditions. So it's about a whole package, and it's about not holding people to account. It's about using a mechanism of really trained practitioners to start doing some of that work and getting underneath what's causing these activities, and hopefully building in obviously some recompense as well. The next one I just want to show you really, really quickly, and then I will stop, is an example, if we go to the next slide, of where level 2 investigations can also drop as well to level 1. So this is somebody who's obviously involved through their network and through their partner of quite serious sort of drug supply, etc., but has been found shoplifting. So this is an opportunity again for us to be more sophisticated in our approach of actually getting this person onto deferred charge, working with them under the 16-week contract, where actually in that period they disclosed really quite severe DA and coercive control. And so what we were able to do, if we move to the next slide, was we were able to set conditions, you know, not to reoffend, engage with mental health, engage with an advert, undertake payback activity to the victim or the community, understand the harm that they were causing. And actually at the end of this person came into the last interview and we were able to actually get them into a refuge and move them away from much more serious offending and offenders that they were linked into. So I give that not to say all big pink and fluffy around offenders, but to just show that actually creating that opportunity of early intervention and not understanding that there are generalised themes in terms of shoplifting, as indeed in any kind of offending, for example, in particular drugs. But not all offenders are the same. We need to understand that and maybe create a window where we can have some of those really informed conversations to get them to raise their self-awareness about what they're doing to themselves and others. And finally, just want to show the next slide where we've started to introduce into our community resolution some very low level kind of online intervention around shoplifting. What we do see is far too many people slipping into the community resolution, which, you know, doesn't really have any teeth. Compared to actually using the deferred prosecution and being able to access that really intensive challenge and support. And that's what we'd like to see, this opening up, so that we can work with many more people who commit retail crime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris and Sarah. That was really powerful, and I particularly was quite inspired by the participant feedback as well. It's great. I think I know Faye as well, but I think the feedback there is really powerful about that impact, and we often miss that from intervention. So thank you. It's really inspiring. Thank you both. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Lucy Evans. She's the lead for Make Amends Restorative Justice. And Lucy, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I feel a bit like I need to have some kind of presentation on screen now so that people don't just need to stare at me the whole way through this. So I am going to try and share just a really basic overview screen of RJ. Can you see that?
It's not on just yet. No, it's coming.
Okay, I knew this would happen.
There it
is.
Is
it there?
It's there. Yeah.
Okay,
all
perfect. I get dreadful FOMO when everyone else has presentations and I don't. So I've had to put one just on screen so everyone knows who I am. So good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me as well to this one. It's been really interesting listening to the other speakers, and hopefully my bit will kind of give a little bit more information about the restorative justice angle that everyone now has spoken about through this afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Lucy Evans. I'm the service manager for the Commissioned Restorative Justice Service covering Devon and Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. We obviously work quite heavily with most crime sectors, most crime types now, retail crime being of particular interest to us, and it's a project that we've picked up and worked with a couple of times in the last few years to try and make some more inroads into how we can best not only deal with victims of retail crime, but also try and divert away from retail crime. So if I give you a really basic, I think, introduction to what I'd like to do is show people what RJ is, what it kind of how it can be facilitated, and then why you should be using it, why it should be something that people are involved in. So what is it? For those of you who don't know, basically it brings communication between someone who caused harm and someone who has been on the receiving end of harm. The whole point being that the person who has been harmed can play a part in their own recovery, can also play a part in how a harmer is dealt with. They can put their point across. It's a victim-led service. It's very much seen as being a victim-led service, but I am a great believer in diversion as well. So for me, an offender who takes part in this is someone who's willing to completely voluntary service, someone who's willing to take part in this and who is happy to sit down in front of somebody and hear about the impact on them as to the harm caused. It's a really powerful intervention. I know Sarah mentioned earlier on about things being a little bit seen as a bit of a soft option in occasions. We come up against that an awful lot with restorative justice, that people think it's quite an easy intervention to take part in. It's really not. I think what we have found, I mean, certainly I've done a restorative intervention as a victim a number of years before I joined the service, and it was a burglary, and I went into prison locally and sat with the man who, it was a workplace burglary, and I sat with him and explained the impact of what happened, what he'd taken. It was a hugely powerful intervention. As far as he was concerned, he'd just stolen, it was a TV primarily, but he had just stolen a television. He couldn't see there was any kind of comeback on that. There was no real understanding as to how that affected staff in the building. I think we all wondered if he had targeted our building, if he'd watched to see if anyone was here or not, if he'd come in, so it was a targeted attack. I personally thought he was going to be about 7 foot tall. He actually wasn't. I discovered when I met him, he was about the same size as me. So there's a lot of impact that people don't realise following following an event that I was able to share with him. He was devastated. And 6 years later, he still comes to see me. So he still comes into the building I work in. He still comes to let me know how he's getting on. He still feels the impact of doing a piece of work where we were able to just explain to him in a really calm, rational way what the harm was and find a way forward for both us as the harmers, the harmed in the story, and him as well. So that kind of gives you an idea of how RJ can work. We do a number of different ways of facilitating restorative justice now. I think people unfortunately think it's still a one-on-one conference type approach, and that's probably now our least common way of exploring RJ. So we can do anything from a restorative conversation. We facilitate letter writing, and we take it backwards and forwards between our participants. We do shuttle with practitioners relaying communication between people. We can hold restorative circles with groups of victims, video conferencing for people either geographically where we can't get people together, or if there's a risk of having people together, or an in-person conference. Retail crime, we have looked at a number of ways of facilitation. One of the biggest issues we've come up against is that we have found a lack of victims coming forward. Unfortunately, people see it either as part of the job, they can't get time off in order to come and sit and speak to somebody who's caused harm about the impact, which has been a really unfortunate kind of events for us, because we've had a number of harmers step forward who would like to take part. So we have explored the idea around having victim representation, having almost a surrogate type of approach where we can have people sit as a victim and explain the impact of the harm caused in order to be able to facilitate this work properly still. So there is a number of ways, the avenues that we're still exploring at the moment as to how we can do this. And for me, the last one is why. And I think, well, I'm hoping that that's a relatively obvious one as to why this is a really powerful intervention. I think if we go for the statistics, then there was a local economic study done whereby every £1 spent on restorative justice, there was a £14 cost saving, and that the reduction in reoffending rates were approximately 27%. Alongside victim satisfaction rates being approximately 95%. So I think in the statistics alone, RJ has a good case for being something that should be used by people. I think certainly on a personal level, as I said, have been involved in an intervention, and I see interventions on a regular basis. I'm lucky enough these days to look at all the outcome feedback from cases that we work. So I can see the participants, both sides, both harmed and harmers, and the benefit that it causes, and the lack of, the ongoing kind of cope and recovery strategy for our victims, as well as the hopefully reduction in reoffending for our harmers. So I think that's about me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy. That was such a wonderful presentation. Thank you, and thanks for putting that presentation together so quickly as well. So you really did pull that off. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our speakers. So to summarize, really, I think I've been struck by an inspiring amount of innovation to meet the growing priority, if you like, of retail crime and how it affects all of the sector. I've been quite excited to review the Q&A section, so please do vote or add your own questions. But one of my favourites, which I'm going to go to now, is a question for Emmeline about who has been your favourite guest on your podcast, or a guest that has taught you something surprising. I love that question. I don't know who asked that, but that's a really great one. So
I wonder if it's one of the guests from the podcast.
Possibly,
So I better tread carefully in case I get the answer wrong. They've all been wonderful in their own right. So we've had prolific offenders have very kindly spoken on the podcast around their journeys into prolific offending, which is and hard to hear. Some of these, as we've heard in some of those presentations, really challenging backgrounds and upbringings. But we've also had senior police officers, we've had retailers, we've had technology vendors. So yeah, I think I don't know if there's a particular favourite, but I think the offenders, just for their sheer candidness and willingness to share difficult stories and you know, publicly admit to the range of offences they've committed, many of which, you know, they feel uncomfortable discussing but have boldly shared. So yeah, I think I would probably choose those.
I echo your thoughts there, and I think having heard some really inspirational people who've been through the system. Keely Knowles is one person. You mentioned offending to recovery, and with PC Stuart Toogood, her story, but it's not just about the offending or recovery, it's about the whole, you know, rehabilitation afterwards and the reconnection with society as a whole, but more importantly her family. I think it's really, really powerful. Yeah, I echo your thoughts. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's also a testament to, you know, this works. What we're talking about today and hearing, you know, it works. All of it works. Thank you, Emmeline. There's a question for Lucy, an interesting one on remorse. So does the offender need to show remorse within restorative justice outcomes?
I've just seen that one, actually. It's a really good question. And the interesting answer for me is no, not necessarily. I think what we always say is what we do need is a harmer who acknowledges they've caused harm. Over and above that, what we often find, interestingly, is that our victims don't necessarily want an apology. It's not always about that. I think we're very much that we work on a case-by-case basis. People may not want to hear an apology. People may not want their harmer to say anything. They may just want to tell them the impact, how it's left them feeling, almost to close the loop and to take control back. So obviously, if we're doing a face-to-face conference, there's an awful lot of preparatory work done with both parties separately before we would even consider bringing them together. It may be that, like, as I said, we could walk into a conference with a harmer who acknowledges they've harmed but doesn't really mind that they've caused harm, as long as our victim is walking in knowing that's the case and is happy with that, then yes, they don't need to show remorse.
That's really powerful. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a very complex area, and I think your description of case by case is really important, and I think it really legitimizes that approach of restorative justice as well. It's not just a textbook template that you follow for every single case. I think that's the value you get, and I think that's really important. Thank you. There's a leading question as well, directly for Sarah, about where did the appointments take place for the woman who couldn't attend a police station due to her DA situation. So I guess this is wider than just this specific case, but the venue really does speak to that. So, oh, you're on mute, Sarah. Sorry.
Schoolgirl error. Absolutely, it's a really good point. So this is all about making things, building that professional relationship. So we will often meet people in other locations. That can be third sector spots, it can be libraries, going for walks, sitting on park benches, going to a cafe. It's all about actually making sure that you are responding to that individual. So for some people, eye contact might be difficult. Going to the police station might be difficult. So we will morph and adapt, and that will be part of the initial kind of needs assessments. We do like to hold the first appointment in the police station because it's really important, unless obviously there is some real issues with that. But we have lots of partners and lots of ways of working it. And this to us is really important because it's about building the relationship, as opposed to being, you know, binary in how we think about how we should engage people. Yeah,
that's really valuable. Thank you, Sarah. I think that person specific, that initial triage and needs assessment, really critical, absolutely critical. Thank you. I've just seen the holy grail of questions. This really gets me very excited around my drug policy hat on. Heroin assisted treatment. I'm not, I mean, I could speak all day long about this, but Emmeline, I guess as the academic, so dimorphine assisted treatment is well evidenced to reduce acquisitive crime significantly, as we've seen in the UK riot trials. I guess that's speaking to. Why can't this medication be offered to eligible patients among other forms of opiate substitute medicine, yes, so methadone, Buvidal, etc., etc. So I guess this is speaking to Cleveland's evaluation of dimorphine assisted treatment, which saw significant crime reduction, and again in the UK riot trials, I think between 2008 and 2011 with John Strang. Yeah, what are your thoughts about medication eligibility?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important question, and I think we need to have that debate nationally around what the most appropriate treatment pathways are. I can't answer the question as to why it's not being more routinely used. I'm sure there's people on the call that are better placed than me to answer that, but I would absolutely echo and support the compelling evidence that using the appropriate medication has a really significant impact, not just on the levels of crime, but also on those peripheral benefits that you've mentioned around improving people's lives in multiple different ways. So I'm familiar with some of these evidence bases. And what's compelling as well is the impact on the public purse. There's clear return on investment in economic terms as well. So Public Health England say for every £1 you spend on rehabilitation for drug users, then it returns £4 to the public purse. I can only imagine that some of this is around the public narrative or the political rhetoric that suggests that we should be tough on crime, and the only interpretation of that is that prison is the only answer. And I think we need to take steps to dismantle that narrative and really drive a better understanding that actually there's alternative ways that are compelling for so many reasons.
I agree with you, and I think you've shown an enormous amount of leadership in speaking to that, and I think it is ideology that often causes more harm than good. You know, it is a nice recommended medication and treatment, you know, within the NHS. So why is it not available? And I think you're absolutely right. It's down to ideology as much as it is budgets. Obviously, finances is one thing, but yeah, thank you for raising that. It requires all of us to be leaders within our sectors. So there's another question about CSTRs, which I think, Emmeline, I'm going to pose this one again to you, and perhaps Chris or Sarah. So with the predicted surge in CSTRs, that's community sentence treatment requirements, how will community drug and alcohol or mental health services, so MHTRs, absorb that increase in demand? Can the business improvement, this is interesting, can the business improvement districts take responsibility to help funding treatment? That's really interesting. So I guess that speaks to offending to recovery largely. But what are your thoughts on CSTRs? And
yeah, I mean, this is absolutely the right direction of travel. I don't think anybody wants to see, you know, drug affected individuals caught in that revolving door of prison. You know, I recently spoke to a drug affected offender who'd served 37 custodial sentences. The idea that the 38th was going to be the one that would suddenly make her see the error of her ways was just ludicrous. And so I think this is absolutely the right direction of travel, but we have to have those facilities ready and in place. Now, the business improvement districts, absolutely, we've got a tried and tested evidence-based practice now, offender to rehab or open to recovery, as that's now sometimes being rebranded in different regions. And it works really well. But there is an issue that some people have pointed out, that if you commit offences and you're drug affected and that's the root causes for it, then you may be able to get a funded place, you know, and offender to recovery uses funding from the retail sector. That's fantastic. But if we don't increase the number of beds, you end up with a slightly problematic situation where those drug affected or alcohol dependent individuals who don't commit offences are then inadvertently being disadvantaged, because essentially they could be being leapfrogged over, or they could have their positions not funded. So this, I think, is a real crux of the issue. This sentiment is absolutely right, but we have to have that investment, and that investment has to be ring fenced. That's one of the key changes that occurred several years ago. The funding was no longer ring fenced, so we saw this huge disinvestment in the services that are so desperately needed in this space.
yeah, that's a really strong point. And I guess that's the role then of combating drugs partnerships to provide that continuity. So with obviously the changes in police and crime commissioners just about to come down the road in 28, and then we have ICB changes, we have mayoral local authority changes. There's a lot of change about to come, and I think the continuity that combating drugs partnerships as a partnership, a whole sector approach to the drug policy is really, or drug strategy is really required, probably more than ever before. So thank you for that. That was a really good question to begin with, whoever put that in there. Thank you.
Jason, could I just come in
Yes,
on that, just to say that, you know, there has to be, I think, a really profound piece of work about how we do almost that cradle to grave whole offender management, and how we have actually a whole system-based approach. But there is a significant gap, and I think DPS to some extent is what we're trying to do, is stop people getting into court in the first place. And that key worker can broker without, we don't commission services, for example, because it is about those relationships, both statutory and local, so we can really fast track people through third sector provision and support, as well as supporting them, as well as when statutory comes in. But there is a big gap, and that gap is going to be more pressing as we have the changes in probation coming down the line, you know, and the sentencing changes to the guidelines, more people needing to be managed in the community. Well, that's easy to say, but actually hard to do if there isn't some real investment in kind of the services and the web of kind of that ecosystem that can really target the gap in between, that are these people that aren't really low level and aren't really prolific. We need to actually think about how do we address that, I think, going forwards.
That's absolutely great. Yeah, that really resonates with me, and conversations that I've had with yourself and also a few other force leads around you know, out of court resolutions, or what can we do, you know, for that most prolific cohort, and particularly a question that comes up, which links to another question here, is about why don't we see more specialized drug courts or specialized retail crime courts for people where all other interventions have failed. So I'm guessing that's the question for where people have been offered out of court resolutions, had deferred prosecutions, and the offending continues, and it needs that, you know, that lifelong approach. And there are great examples, and in fact, it's something that our you know, the centre works on. So I guess that's more of a statement question, but yeah, why don't we see more? But I think they're coming. That's probably the way to summarize that one. So I've kind of answered it myself, really. Thank you so much. I'm going to sum up now. Just final remarks, really. Emmeline, Sarah, Chris, Lucy, if you wanted to add any final remarks, but I'm really appreciative of this session and your presentations. They've been exceptionally inspiring and also, you know, challenging the system, because we all need to we all need to adopt leadership and change the system ourselves. So thank you for that. I've taken an awful lot away, and to the audience as well. So thank you for joining, giving up your valuable time. This will be recorded. The recording will be on YouTube. Please do check back in, and I really look forward to seeing you soon. So thank you. So just over to Emmeline, Sarah, Lucy, any final remarks?
And just a final thought for me, yeah, brilliant discussion, excellent questions, you know, really beginning to push this issue and dive really deep and beyond the sort of common sense understanding of retail. I think the final remark for me is around understanding those different offender profiles and what's motivating people. Only by getting under the surface and addressing the root causes of their criminality can we really have any meaningful reduction in retail crime and the various harms that it causes to businesses and communities.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Emily. Really appreciate that. Thank you. And Sarah?
I just want to say everything Emmeline's just said. and also I do have to big up my colleague who hasn't brought his camera on, I don't think, but Chris has been instrumental in leading this, and I think in forces you do need somebody who has a real passion around it, and gives it the prominence, you know, that it deserves.
Thank you so much. That's really powerful. Thank you. And good leadership there, recognising your colleagues. I love that. Thank you. And Lucy?
Funny enough, I was going to come back in on it's the Chris, like All Hail Chris show, clearly.
Oh, brilliant.
I think, yeah, it's been great working with Chris recently, and it's really lovely to be able to link up a third sector, you know, and something like restorative justice with the police interventions in order to try and combat something in a slightly different way as opposed to a traditional route. So for me, you know, I've got some great colleagues in the Southwest pushing this one. So yeah, very lucky. Again, like, it's been a great discussion. Let's hope this can change things going forward.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to close this session now. So please do check the chat for a link to the next session and also the recording for this one. So yeah, check back on YouTube as well. So thank you so much, everybody, especially our speakers. Thank you so much, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.